Hey again, and welcome back to a new video, and welcome back to the first video of a new series on my channel. It is a little bit similar to my old series, the Legendary comparison, but in this video and this series I don't want to present the Legendaries itself, I want to present the whole champion in detail. So I kinda want to do a guide for either new players or for just players looking for a certain champion they haven't mastered yet. Just a little reminder in the beginning that those types of videos and guides require a lot of time for me to produce, so it probably will take a while until I present the next champion and bring out the next champion guide. I personally love to have the information I'd like to learn visualized. So for the ones who also like to read what I'm talking about, I've made a whole Google Docs document where everything I'm talking about is listed or written down, and the link to that Google Docs document is in the video description, so you can look in it whenever you want. The first champion I want to present to you is Ying, the Blossom. And I decided to start with Ying because Ying is only a healer, not really a support. When you want to learn other supports, you want to pay attention to utility or other things they can give to their team. But Ying doesn't really have any utility she could offer her team, so that's why I decided to start with Ying, because Ying is only a healer and all she does is healing. Before I start with the guide, I want to give those of you who just found the video and don't know me or don't know if my opinion is trustworthy, give a few information about myself so you can make your own opinion about me. I'm introverted, I'm a tank and support main. I played this game for over 4,000 hours and I think I'm currently in level 77 on Ying, having her played for almost 130 hours. So I would say I have a good understanding of the game, I have great game sense and good mechanical skills, so I think my opinion is kind of based on higher elo, and not saying my opinion is the correct opinion, but I guess I have a good understanding to present Ying as a good champion to you. The champion guide will have 10 different parts. In the first part I just clarify some terms I use in the champion guide so new players understand what I mean when using certain terms, and I also list the abbreviations I use in the Google Docs document so everyone understands what I mean when using those abbreviations. In the second part of the video I will present Ying's champion kit, so I talk about her abilities, I talk about how long her cooldowns are, I just talk a little bit more detailed about Ying than the description you find in the game for her. In the next part of the video I will talk about her legendary, so I shortly present what each legendary does and then you can decide whether you want to listen to the next part or not. After going quickly over the legendaries, I will talk about how to play each legendary. So I will do something like a guide and give you my opinion on how to play each legendary in a good way. After you decided which legendary you want to play, you obviously want to choose a loadout. So that's why the next part is about the loadouts for each legendary. I will share my loadouts. I will also talk about why I choose certain cards in the loadout, and I might present other cards I'm not using but are still good cards to use on Ying. The next part is about maps, so I will present great maps and bad maps, even though I think Ying doesn't really have bad maps or you don't really lose a game because you picked Ying on a certain map, but I still want to talk about great maps and bad maps for Ying. Part 7 is about counters, so I will talk about which champion does Ying counter and by which champions does Ying get countered, so you understand when you want to pick Ying and when you maybe don't want to pick Ying. In part 8 I will talk about items, so which items do you want to get on Ying or which items would I recommend on Ying and why would I recommend getting those items. Part 9 is about does Ying synergize well with anyone, because you obviously want to have champions on your team which are played nicely with Ying together, so you understand whether you want to pick Ying or another support when having those champions on your team. And the last part is about tips for Ying and support tips in general, so just giving my advice what you want to pay attention to and what you can do to have a nicer experience on playing supports. Before I finally get into the champion guide and start with Ying the Blossom, just a quick reminder that every part is timestamped, so if you don't want to listen to a certain part because you're an experienced player already and know the terms already I might be using, you can just look in the video description and skip to the part you want to see. When I talk about CC, I basically mean crowd control, so any kind of stun, cripple, where you can't use your movement ability, root, where you're forced to stay in place but still be able to shoot, silence, where you can't use any ability, not even ults, knockback, slow, banish, that means enemies can't damage you but your supports can't even heal you, polymorph, where you just get ulted by, for example, Pip or Moji. LOS is a really important term on supports. It basically means line of sight, so having a straight view on your ally or on the enemy. There are a lot of supports where you actually need to have line of sight to be able to heal them. When I talk about support champions, especially in guides, I often talk about utility as well, and utility is basically a buff the support champion gives to their team or offers to enable them. Utility, for example, can be extra movement speed or CC. Squishies being champions easy to kill, so champions having a low HP pool. Those champions are, for example, flanks or supports. Cord or Cauterize is an item you can buy in the game which prevents you from hitting your ally for the full amount, so it reduces the healing you do to them. Reju or Rejuvenate is the counter to Cord and it increases the healing you receive. And now the abbreviations I might use in the Google Docs document. CD means cooldown, CDR means cooldown reduction, LMB is your left mouse button, RMB is your right mouse button, DR means damage reduction, and TP means teleport. Let's finally start with the guide and let's talk about Ying's champion kit. Before I start talking about her kit in detail and talk about numbers and stuff, I just want to summarize her kit shortly. So Ying is a support champion having 2200 HP and she's the very definition of healing over time. You can provide great heals in crucial situations due to your ult being able to heal all your allies for a great amount of HP over the whole map. With Ying's Legendaries you can change the way your abilities work, so you can either buff your abilities or also make them work in a completely different way, so you at least have 3 different ways of playing Ying as a support. Whenever a flank decides to flank you and attack you, you can either use your illusions to body block yourself and heal you with them, or TP to your team and ask them to help you. I would say Ying's damage output is something in between high damage and damage over time, but you rather want to stay close to mid-range to bring out your damage. In a 1v1 you do a respectable amount of damage to the target you're facing. Ying is a very strong healer, but due to the fact that she's only a heal bot and is kinda lacking on utility she could offer her team, she gets played less and less in most team compositions. Ying's LMB is called Illusory Mirror and she basically fires out a burst of 5 ticks with each dealing 90 damage, so you would deal 450 damage if you hit all your 5 ticks against the enemy. Ying has an ammo count of 8 and even though you fire out 5 ticks, every 5 ticks only count as 1 ammo you consume. Ying has a massive damage fall-off and her damage fall-off starts after 100 units. That's why you prefer to stay close to mid-range to get out a consistent but respectable amount of damage. I usually wouldn't talk about the ult charge being given by abilities, but because her ult is such a strong ability and it is so easy to charge your ult, I just want to say that you will get up to 4% ult charge when you hit all your 5 ticks on the enemy. Ying's RMB is called Shatter, and while using this ability, Ying shatters her illusions to chase down enemies and exploding after 2 seconds, dealing a burst of 500 damage to the enemy she hit. When activating this ability, your illusions will chase down the closest visible enemy, but if there is no visible enemy, the illusions will stay in place and explode after 2 seconds. For each enemy hit with your explosion, you will gain 3% ultimate charge rate, but keep in mind that if you play Life Exchange, your right click works a little bit differently. But I will talk about how Life Exchange works and how to use your right click on Life Exchange later on in the video. When playing Focusing Lens or Resonance, the cooldown of your shatter is 4 seconds. Okay, let's talk about Ying's main resource of healing, her Q ability being called Illusions and having a 5-second cooldown before you can use this ability again. When using this ability, Ying places up to 2 illusions, restoring 400 HP every 1.5 seconds over 8 seconds. So as I said earlier on, she's the very definition of healing over time, so she deals 2000 HP for 1 illusion over 8 seconds. One thing which makes Ying very easy for new players is that you just place down your illusion and your illusions will prioritize the ally with the lowest HP pool, so you don't have to do anything but placing down your illusions. But keep in mind that your enemies are able to destroy your illusions and also by bulldozer to increase the damage they deal to them and kill them even faster. Another nice mechanic given by this ability is that Ying is able to sustain herself because her illusions will also target her. But keep in mind that Rejuvenate does not affect the heal she receives by her own illusions because Rejuvenate does only increase the heal you receive by other players. Ying's next ability is called Dimensional Link and has a cooldown of 14 seconds, and this ability helps Ying to get out of crucial situations when getting flanked or to get close to your team to make sure your team is healed. When activating this ability, Ying swaps places with the farthest away illusion. If no illusions are active, Ying will teleport to the last position of the farthest active illusion. Your ability lasts 4 seconds and you can reactivate your ability as often as you want within those 4 seconds. If you reactivate your ability, you will TP back to the point you started it. You can target an illusion while looking at them to TP to that illusion. Okay, let's talk about Ying's strongest ability, and this ability is also kind of broken, especially in early game. Illusory Rift for ultimate. If you activate your ultimate, you will heal all your allies no matter where they are on the map for 120 HP every 0.2 seconds over a time period of 8 seconds. That's 4800 HP in total for each ally on your team. By using this ability, you're also able to activate your Dimensional Link and TP to your allies. But keep in mind that TPing to your allies is only possible when your ultimate is active. Another nice mechanic is that this ability will last even if you die, so you can activate your ult when being low HP, and if you die, your ultimate will still go on and keep your team healed. Let's get into the third part of the Ying guide and let's talk about Ying's Legendaries. Similar to all other champions in the game, Ying has 3 different Legendaries, and in my opinion all of her Legendaries are playable and viable, so there are many champions where you only play one legendary because the other ones are actually garbage to play, but in my opinion Ying's legendaries are very good. Furthermore, you also have more playstyles than just the playstyles given by your legendaries, because even if you play a damage legendary, you still can play as a healer and get out a lot of heals to support your team in a very good way. As already said, Ying's legendaries allow her to buff at least one ability out of her kit or make one ability work in a completely different way. Your default legendary on Ying is called Focusing Lens, and Focusing Lens buffs your illusory mirror, so your basic LMB, your weapon attack. This legendary helps you to make Ying a serious damage dealer and helps her to win more 1v1s easily. If you hit all your 5 ticks on one enemy, Focusing Lens adds an additional 200 damage to the enemy you shot at. Considering the fact that you now deal 650 damage with your illusory mirror makes it really easy for you to farm damage on tanks or actually kill squishies very easily and go in for a 1v1. Important to say is that the damage buff does not work on shields or deployables, it only works on real players. You have 2 different playstyles for Focusing Lens. The one playstyle is a very supportive playstyle where you try to heal your team as much as possible. That means you want to use your illusions for your team, you want to use your ult to defend your team or to engage with your team. And the other playstyle is a more selfish playstyle, a real damage dealer playstyle. You try to only use the illusions for yourself, you shatter your illusions to deal damage, only kinda ult for yourself when you're getting low and not caring about your team at all and only paying attention to deal as much damage as possible. Once you played Ying to level 2, you will unlock the legendary Life Exchange. And Life Exchange is a very nice legendary to make Ying an actual main support and giving her the ability to sustain the whole team. If you decide to play Life Exchange, you change the whole way how your shatter works or how your right click works. If you now use your shatter, you won't destroy your illusions anymore. Instead, you will heal a targeted ally for a burst of 700 HP. That also means you will keep your illusions up to keep your allies healed with your illusions while using your right click to get out the burst heal. I remember when I first unlocked the legendary Life Exchange and tried to play it. I didn't realize how to use my right click properly because I didn't realize that this ability is now a hit scan ability. So that means you have to use your crosshair over your ally and shatter to give them the burst heal of 700 HP. because this is such a strong ability to give your allies consistently a burst heal of 700 HP. Your cooldown is increased by 1 second, so your shatter cooldown is now 5 seconds without using any items or loadout cards. The last legendary you can unlock with Ying is called Resonance, and it's your level 8 unlock. Resonance helps you to deal a little bit more damage with your illusions and also buffs your illusions in other certain ways. With Resonance, your illusions not only deal damage or explode when you actually use your shatter. Your illusions will also explode when they get killed or destroyed by enemies or when they expire. And the damage they deal is also increased to 550 damage instead of 500. Furthermore, your illusions gain additional movement speed and additional explosion radius while you shatter your illusions. As for focusing lens as well, you can decide between two different playstyles. One, again, you have a supportive playstyle where you try to keep your illusions up and heal your team as much as possible. Because the idea behind the supportive Reso Ying is that you punish the enemy team when they destroy your illusions. And the other playstyle is, as for focusing lens as well, a damage based playstyle. So you actually want to destroy your illusions as much as possible and just get out as much damage as possible. As I said earlier on, everything is timestamped, so if you don't want to see how a certain legendary is played, you can just skip to whatever legendary or whatever part of the video you want to see. In the next part, so in the fourth part of the guide, I will talk about how each legendary is played, what do you want to pay attention to, and just general tips and advice how you want to play the legendaries. As for the unlocks as well, Focusing Lens is the first legendary I want to talk about. And just because of the fact that I mostly played Ying as a support and mostly play Ying also as a damage support, I want to start with the support playstyle for Focusing Lens. I think important to say is that even though I call it support playstyle, it's not really a main support legendary. You're still a damage dealer or still a damage support, and you shouldn't pick Focusing Lens Ying when you're the only support on your team. The first difference between Focusing Lens support playstyle and Focusing Lens selfish playstyle is the loadout. But I will talk about the loadouts in the part after this part. So the main idea of this legendary or this playstyle in this legendary is that you try to keep your team healed, just be another resource of healing, so you make it a little bit easier for your main support to either stay alive or keep your team alive, but you also want to try to get out as much damage as possible, especially with your weapon, so with your illusory mirror, because you get that additional 200 extra damage when hitting all your 5 ticks. As you remember, I said Ying is the very definition of healing over time, and this is also what makes it really good for this legendary and this playstyle, cause you can mainly focus on dealing damage, just place illusions, let your illusions alive, don't shatter them, because every time you shatter, your illusions will lose the ability to heal your allies. So the idea is to place your illusions behind your team or on flank routes to keep your flanks and off tanks healed, and then just focus on dealing damage. You either want to focus damage on tanks, or it is even better to focus your damage on squishies, because it is just way easier to kill squishies and you will get way more advantage when killing squishies like support or flanks on the enemy team. As for main support Ying as well, you want to place your illusions behind cover, because you want to make sure that your team is healed, you want to make sure that you don't need to waste your resources, you want to make sure that you don't always have to place another illusion, because you want to focus on dealing damage. So once you place your illusions, you can just focus on dealing damage. Unless the illusion is killed or expired, you don't have to place another illusion. Another idea or possibility of this legendary and this playstyle is to babysit your support. You want to make it as easy for your main support to keep the rest of your team healed, so you can spend all your healing resources on your main support, and whenever they get flanked, when they get dove, or when someone tries to engage on them, you kinda want to focus those flanks and off tanks. You want to put down your both illusions for your main support, and if needed you also want to ult for your main support. But I would say this is more rare playstyle, you usually wouldn't actually babysit your main support. So what's the other possibility where you can place yourself, where you can position, or where you can play? Keep in mind that even though you gain additional damage while hitting all your 5 ticks, you kinda need to be close or mid-range, because you will have a lot of damage follow. That's why you kinda want to play on flank routes, you kinda want to play close range, you kinda want to play with flanks or off tanks together to support them, provide another resource of healing, or just play on your own, but try to don't be that far away to lose any additional damage because of damage fall off. Even though I said you want to maybe go on flank routes, you never want to engage, you kinda want to stay behind because you have a more supportish playstyle, more supportish loadout. That's why you're kinda lacking on other points or other cards to actually engage in 1v1s, or you rather want to stay behind, make sure your flank and off tank is healed, provide another impactful damage, but that's all you want to do. You never want to actually go in and flank the backline when playing a supportish focusing lens playstyle. But that doesn't mean that you want to run away from 1v1s or avoid 1v1s, because you can win most 1v1s when playing focusing lens and when playing around your illusions. But you usually would play the focusing lens support playstyle when your main support is picked for other reasons than tons of healing. You rather pick your main support for utility. The team really needs the extra healing you give them, and that's why there's no value in getting those kills when your team is lacking on heals and actually dying on point. You also want to keep in mind that a team without a support or without heals is more likely to lose fights over time, so whenever your main support died, you really want to focus on healing your team, especially your tanks being on the point, because everything is about winning the point fights and sustaining your tanks until your main support is back. That also means you want to consider ulting when your main support is dead, and just try to do as much as possible to keep your team healed and maybe kill the most threatening enemy. Now that I talked about her ult, I want to clarify that even though your ult is really strong and you still can get most heals in the game only with ulting and placing down illusions, it's not enough for main support, because your ult and your illusions are not consistent enough to actually keep your team healed over the whole point fight, over all fights, over the whole match. That's why it's a really strong legendary and Ying is a really strong healer, but picking focusing lens as main support is not consistent enough to provide heals to all your teammates. I've heard many people saying that they only pick focusing lens because they die a lot in 1v1s when they get pushed by an Androxus or another flank, and they just want to have the extra damage to make it easier to defend themselves when being the only support on the team. But I will show you later on how to play live exchange, so main support Ying as the only support, and actually show you how to defend yourself, and also talk about general tips you can use on every support, which make it just way easier for you to stay live and don't are afraid of 1v1s against flanks. So to wrap this playstyle up, you want to place your illusions consistently in line of sight to your teammates and try to keep them healed, and also try to keep your illusions behind cover so you can just focus on dealing damage. You want to try to protect your main support or support your main support as much as possible, help them when they're getting flanked, maybe ulting, and just helping your team whenever your main support died, because as I said earlier on, a team without a support will die over time. Try to hit all your 5 ticks, because otherwise you won't gain any value with your legendary and you just spam out a little bit damage, but you don't have any impact on the game or almost no impact on the game. You want to try to stay in close to mid range, because otherwise your damage fall off is too high, so it doesn't really make a difference if you play focusing lens or not. And you kind of want to go on flank routes and can decide to actually support your flanks and your off tanks, put illusions behind them so they have a resource of healing, and your main support can focus on the point fight, can focus on your point tank, or spam heals on your point tank, and you just help your flank and your off tank to win the fights on the flank routes. If you can decide between focusing damage on squishies or tanks, you definitely want to focus squishies, because it's A, way easier to kill squishies, and B, it is way more impactful to kill their support or kill their flanks, so your flanks can actually kill the enemy team support. So even though it is easier to hit your shots on tanks, or it feels really satisfying to burst on tanks, you kinda want to always focus squishies whenever possible. Now that I finished talking about the supportive playstyle focusing lens, I want to talk about the selfish one. And the first difference between both playstyles is that you would choose a different loadout, because when playing a selfish playstyle, you rather would choose cards which make you more tanky, or which give you any impact on your LMB, or which are around your clones, and you want to focus less on keeping your team healed. You just want to have the mindset of a DPS player. In the beginning, I want to clarify that this is a really extreme playstyle, and it's only a theory-based playstyle. In general, you wouldn't actually play that selfish and don't care about your team at all, but I just want to present both playstyles and usually would play a playstyle in between those two. When playing the selfish playstyle, you don't really care about your team, you don't use illusions for your team, you only use the illusion to keep yourself healed. So whenever you're full HP again, you want to shatter your illusions. Whenever you're getting low, you want to ult for yourself. Whenever you're getting ulted or getting affected by CC, you want to activate your ult. But you don't really pay attention to other ultimates affecting your team. You don't really watch at the HP bars, you just focus on dealing damage, focus on getting kills. As I said, you really have the mindset of a DPS player. You could decide for a selfish playstyle or at least a selfish based loadout when you already have a strong main support who's able to sustain your team on their own, because they also provide a little bit more utility than you, which is easy because you don't have any utility, but you still want to focus more on dealing damage to them because they don't really rely on your heals, because they are already strong healers who can sustain a team on their own. Even though it's even better to have more heals, because then it's even harder for the enemy team and your comp is really broken in early game. But the more Cauterize comes online, the more you get countered or your team comp gets countered. So keep in mind that you still want to focus on dealing damage. The main difference to the supportive playstyle or focusing lens is that you have a different loadout, as I said already, and you actually want to try to flank on your own or go in the backline, kill their sniper, kill their backline, kill their support. Stuff like that, because your team already has a strong support, so you actually can go on your own and you actually want to be the main damage dealer, or at least one damage dealer. And as I said earlier on, you want to be the typical DPS player, so just be selfish, overextend and ask for heals. No, I'm joking. But still, you want to be a actual damage dealer and not a support. You don't want to waste your time on putting down illusions whenever you could have gotten the kill, because therefore you have your main support and you just want to focus on dealing damage and getting kills. Just before I get into the live exchange part, I want to tell you that I will list a link to a unlisted YouTube video with illusion positioning and positioning of Ying herself. I just feel like it would be too much or too long for this video to actually put it in there and explain it. But for the ones who are interested where to put your illusions or where to position yourself, there will be an unlisted link in the description, so you can see where I place my illusions and what I have to say about it. Okay, so let's start talking about Live Exchange. Live Exchange is the legendary, as I said before, which makes Ying a main supporter, which makes it possible for Ying to actually support her whole team on her own, just because you have the ability to now give your teammates a burst heal with using your shatter. But only because you have a strong burst heal now doesn't mean that you want to forget about your illusions and just place them wherever. You want to try to place one illusion on the side where your off tank and your flank go, so you can keep them healed at least over time and give them 2000 HP over time. And then you want to place the other illusion behind your point tank, so you can get healed by that illusion and your point tank obviously can also get healed by your illusion. On most maps it's actually possible to hide your illusions and to also place them on the flank route and behind your point tank. So that's why I like to play Ying on most maps, because you can easily heal both teams, so to say, or both parts of your team. One part is the off tank flank and one part is the damage dealer, point tank and healer. But besides our illusions, we obviously have the ability to burst heal our allies due to the fact that we are playing Live Exchange. So how to use our right click, or when do we want to use our right click? Especially when you're playing support, you want to make sure that you have enabled that you can see when your teammates are affected by Cauterize. If your teammates have a blue health bar, they are not affected by Cauterize. And if your teammates have a greenish health bar, they are affected by Cauterize. As for all healing abilities in the game, you want to try to use your right click when your teammates are not affected by Cauterize, because then they will get the full heal of 700 HP. Especially in late game, it can be kinda rough to keep your team healed when you always use your right click when they are affected by Cauterize 3, because then you will lose a lot of HP you could have given to them. So that's why you want to try to use your R&B whenever a teammate is out of court, and if your teammates are good, they try to hide and let court fall off. You have two different options on who to use your right click on, because you either can burst heal and top off your DPS or flank players, or you can give your tank the burst heal and make it way easier for you to heal them quickly to full HP. I personally would say your tanks are always your first priority, because it is very important to make sure you win the point fights or at least don't lose the point fights. So if possible, and if your tanks are healthy enough, especially your point tank, you want to try to give your life exchange heals or your shatter heal to your DPS players, because you can top them off greatly and help them in a 1v1 to win it, and it's way easier to bring them back to full HP, because if your DPS players are back to full HP, then they can go back in the fight and you can prioritize your tanks afterwards. But in most cases you end up using your shatter heal on your tanks, because your tanks are never really full HP and most DPS players don't really play around their support, so they don't pay attention to be in line of sight and they just expect to get healed, but they never think about where the support is or where they have to position to get a heal. So you never want to overextend to actually heal your DPS players, because if they are not in line of sight and if you can reach them with using a TP or whatever, and they die, then it's not your fault, because they didn't position around you and they didn't make it possible for you to keep them healed. So that's why in most cases you just use your right click for your tanks. Furthermore, you actually placed an illusion for your DPS player, so that should be enough to keep them healed over time, and a burst heal or the shatter heal is just nice for them to have it. It's just a great heal on top, but they shouldn't expect to actually get it. I mean, in higher elos you definitely want to try to always keep your DPS players healed as well, but when getting into Ying, your main priority is to actually place illusions for them, that's enough, and keep your tanks healed with your right click. Another reason why it can be hard to keep your DPS players and flank players healed is because they often position far away from you, so even if you're playing on an open map, it kinda is hard to actually hit your right click heal over far distance. So it actually requires a lot of practice to make sure you hit those heals over far distances. But you can try whenever your point tank is full and your off tank is also full HP, you can always try to hit your right click and practice on hitting your right click on your far away DPS players. Just a quick reminder here that you want to place your illusions behind cover, because then your illusions can still heal your allies in most cases, but the enemy can't see your illusions and can't kill them, so they can't destroy your healing resource. Especially against damage grog, it is mandatory to hide your clones, because otherwise it's just free damage for him to farm his ultimate and farm damage on your team. As explained earlier on, I've heard from many people that they pick focusing lens over life exchange because they want to make it a little bit easier for them to defend themselves in a 1v1 or whenever they get flanked. I also said I want to show you a way or explain a way on how to defend yourself efficiently and on how to make it possible for you to win 1v1s even against a flank pushing you. Especially on life exchanging, you always want to try to stay alive, because you're the main support and supports always should be the person dying last, because if you die, your heals die and then your team will also die over time. So your main priority is always to stay alive and even die less than your point tank. But what do you want to do when you get pushed by the off tank flanked you, or another person on their team decides to actually push you and tries to kill you? Remember that I said your illusions are a very nice and efficient way to keep your team healed over time, but that's actually not all your illusions can do. Your illusions have 1000 HP, so whenever a flank decides to push you, you want to place an illusion in front of you. And your illusion is actually able to body block you, so you always want to try to walk around your illusion whenever the flank also tries to walk past your illusion. And then your illusion will also keep you healed in a 1v1 against that flank. So you're able to heal yourself, you're able to have a kind of shield in front of you, and you're also able to damage the enemy because you're able to shoot through your illusion. So this is how you want to use your illusions for yourself to work against the flank and make sure you win the actual 1v1 against the flank as the main support Ying. I mean, this technique obviously doesn't work against every champion or doesn't work in every 1v1, because there are also champions being able to fly above your illusion, so they can just shoot over your illusion and still damage you, or champions dealing AoE damage, so they're actually able to also hit you when you hide behind your illusions. but it's still a very efficient and nice way to make it harder for the enemy flank to get the kill on you, and to also give yourself an advantage to win the 1v1 against the flank. Furthermore, it's a very efficient way to gain some time to make it easier for your team to turn around and help you, so your Mercor can try to turn around and hook the enemy flank and kill them, because you don't have to win all fights against the flanks on your own. It's a team-based game, so there's always your team which is able to help you, and there's always your team which is supposed to actually help you and defend you against the enemy flank. Okay, now let's talk about your ult. When do you want to use your ult, or in what cases you want to use your ult? You have two different ways of ulting. You either can ult aggressively or defensively. So whenever you try to ult aggressively, you're trying to enable your team. You're saying, let's go team, let's go in, let's try to actually push the enemy team, and let's try to win the point fight, let's try to actually get some picks, because especially in early game your ult is very broken and it is very hard for the enemy team to kill someone being affected by Ying ult. And the defensive way is obviously to defend your team, so whenever the enemy team tries to push on you and starts a push, such as using CC ults like Inara or Damba, because then you're probably affected by that ult and not able to keep your team healed, and it is very easy to kill a whole team when they are affected by CC ults. So whenever you hear CC ults like Damba or Inara, as I said, you want to consider ulting and make sure your team is healed. The other way you want to use your ult defensively is when you see your tanks are low or most teammates are low, you just want to use your ult and make sure your team will get healed to full HP, or at least make it harder for the enemy team to finish up those kills. As I explained earlier on, while ulting you're able to use your dimensional link to also teleport to your allies, and this offers two nice techniques. The one technique is to activate your ult while getting out of spawn and teleport onto the point to your allies when you died early on the point fight, because then you don't have to ride the whole way back to the point, you're just there after respawning in some way. And the other technique is the other way around. When you're getting low, you just activate your ult for your whole team. Not a selfish one, just for your whole team, but you want to heal out of combat, out of court especially. Then just use your TP to an ally being out of the fight. This can be an ally in spawn, but then make sure you teleport back before the dimensional link ends. And just heal yourself out of court and receive the full heal, the full advantage of your ultimate. Where do you want to position as Ying? You preferably stay behind your team and just place down illusions to heal your flank routes or your tanks with your illusions, and then just use your right click whenever. But whenever your right click is on cooldown, you're trying to get out some damage, apply some cauterize to the enemy team, since you apply cauterize with your basic weapon attacks. Whenever you see an ally being out of line of sight but you're able to reach them through a TP to illusion, you can try to actually TP to that illusion and give them the shatter heal, the life exchange shield, and TP back. But I'd say this is a more advanced technique, so in the beginning you just want to focus on placing illusions and healing allies being actually in line of sight. Okay, now let's talk about Resonance, and I personally feel like Resonance is the weakest of all her legendaries because it doesn't really benefit her team, it's just a selfish playstyle. I mean, it's kind of similar to Focusing Lens, but with Resonance you actually want to destroy your illusions in some way. But you also have two different playstyles, more or less different playstyles, which being similar to Focusing Lens, so either the selfish one or the support one. Okay, let's start with the supportish playstyle for Resonance. You also want to try to use your clones only to heal your allies, so you just place down your clones, your illusions, on the point preferably, because you want to counter the enemy team, or you want to give your team some heal, but whenever the enemy is focusing down your illusions and killing them, they trigger an explosion and you want to get out that extra damage. But keep in mind, you never want to actually destroy your own illusions, because you still want to have the heal for your team. Preferably you play this legendary in closed up maps such as Jaguar Falls, where it's hard for the enemy point tag at least to get out of the range of your illusions. Because, as I said earlier on, you want to place on your illusions, but you don't want to destroy them. You want the enemies to destroy them, or you want them to expire. And every time they get destroyed or they expire, they trigger an explosion, dealing 550 damage to the enemy point tag at least. While placing the illusions on the point, you're kind of forcing the enemy team to kill your illusions and trigger a explosion damaging their own team. This is the main idea of it. You try to place the illusions but never shatter them because you want to keep the heal. So if the enemy team doesn't destroy your illusions, you just have the advantage of giving free heals to your allies. And if they destroy it, you just get the advantage of dealing extra damage to the enemy point tank at least. Usually Ying is always countered by damage grog, but in this rare situation you could consider this a counter to damage grog, because if he destroys your illusions, if you use your illusions to farm his shock pulls, then he will destroy them and trigger the explosion to damage his own teammates, his own main tank. But I still would never pick Ying into damage grog, or in general I wouldn't pick Ying into grog to think about playing resonance to counter grog. So you're trying to stay behind your team, just place the illusions and spam your LMB whenever possible, because your damage is not really greatly increased, such as when playing focusing lens. You just deal a little bit more damage and have another form of explosion when your illusions expire. But because you're playing the supportive way or playstyle, you stay behind your team, place your illusions, use your LMB whenever possible, but that's all. You never want to actually go into a fight, you just stay behind, do some support things, heal them passively with the illusions, and just click LMB, apply cauterize. That's it, what you want to do in most ways. But keep in mind that this is not a main support legendary. You just deal a little bit more damage, and even if you have high healing numbers, this is probably because of your illusions and your ult, but that doesn't mean that you are consistent enough or your heals are consistent enough to actually keep your team healed. You're just a support or another healing resource for your main support to make it or make life a little bit less hard for your main support. Another possible pick is to just pick 2 off supports, going damage legendaries, and you focus more on a supportive playstyle with resonance. But I personally would recommend to rather do it with focusing lens, because you still have the same or almost the same amount of healing than when playing resonance, but you deal more damage than when playing resonance in most cases. Okay, let's just quickly go over the selfish playstyle of resonance to wrap her legendaries up. It is kind of similar to the selfish focusing lens playstyle. You just focus completely on dealing damage, playing a little bit selfish, in theory at least. So you're trying to actually play on flank routes, you're going with your off tank and trying to support them, spam your illusions to deal damage and force out abilities out of the enemy team. This is the playstyle you're trying to commit or to achieve when playing selfish resonance, or actually damage resonance playstyle. In theory, you try to get out 2 clones to deal a burst of 1100 damage and also deal a burst of 450 with your LMB to pressure the enemy team and actually be a threat in a 1v1. Lastly, to this legendary, I want to say, try to not explode your illusions when you're low and just heal yourself with your illusions. And obviously you want to try, as for focusing lens as well, to use your ult for your teammates if possible. Even if it's a selfish playstyle, your ult is so strong that you kind of always want to try to support your team with it. You're still a support. So after deciding which legendary you want to pick, you definitely want to choose your own loadout or create your own loadout. So what are the loadouts I use for each of the legendaries, and also what are the loadouts for selfish and supportive legendaries? I just want to go over quickly, and afterwards I explain why I use certain cards and what I want to achieve with choosing those cards. So quick info, I just go quickly over the loadouts and give a short explanation for using the cards, and afterwards I give a more detailed explanation for the cards. So maybe for new players this is actually a little bit more important to listen to the following part. So if you feel like your loadouts are good or you're not interested in the detailed explanation, you can just look in the description. As I said earlier on, everything is timestamped, and skip to the next part. Let's start with the supportive playstyle of focusing lens, and keep in mind for this playstyle I want to try to keep my team heal as much as possible, so I don't want to explode my own illusions, but I still want to try to get out as much damage as possible. The first card I use on level 5 is Carry On, and Carry On helps me to increase the duration of my illusions, because as you remember, I want to try to keep my team healed as much as possible, so longer duration on my illusion means longer passive heals for my team. Next I use Spring Bloom 5, and Spring Bloom reduces the cooldown of my illusions when an enemy destroys my illusions, so I can spawn another illusion right after it got killed, so to say. Encouragement on level 3 helps me to reduce my cooldowns, so all my cooldowns after getting an limb. So it not only helps me to reduce the cooldown of my next illusion, it also helps me to reduce the cooldown of my dimensional link, so it's easier for me to survive when I'm getting dove on. The other two cards, or the last two cards, are filler cards, so they have at least some impact, but they are not as impactful as the other ones using on a higher level. Mesmerism 1 helps me to give me 1 ammo after placing an illusion, so whenever I'm fighting in a 1v1, it basically helps me to not have to reload, because I consistently can place illusions when hiding behind them and when the enemy shoots them and kills them, because then, remember, I get the cooldown reduction, place another illusion, get another ammo, and it also helps me when I run out of ammo, just need another ammo to kill someone, place illusion, get 1 ammo back. And Rewind basically spawns an illusion when I use my TP, so I can just TPing around and still placing illusions to keep my team healed, because the illusions immediately heal after they get placed, so even if I only can have up 2 illusions at a time, I can TP at least 3 times around, place 3 illusions, getting out at least 3 times the first heal out of my illusions. So let's talk about the Focus Lens Selfish loadout, and for the Selfish one I use Tankable on level 5 because it increases my maximum HP, so I'm more tanky, it's easier for me to survive longer because I have more HP, I think I don't have to explain it. Then I use Encouragement on level 3 to again get the cooldown reduction after getting an limb, because I want to spam clones or illusions to deal damage to the enemies and also want to reduce the cooldown of my dimensional link. Mesmerism on level 2 to get some ammo after placing illusions, because I consistently place illusions, destroy them when not needing to heal myself. Squadron on level 3 because I just want to make my illusions a little bit more tanky to survive longer when the enemies are shooting them. And Spring Forward level 2 is just increased duration of my dimensional link to make sure I can TP a little bit longer, I can get out of fights easier and not have to worry about not TPing back in time. For Life Exchange I only have 1 loadout, obviously, because it's the main support loadout or legendary, so you don't have to need another one, a selfish one. Because your right click is so strong and offers your allies a burst heal of 700 HP up front, you want to reduce the cooldown obviously as much as possible, so that's why I'm using Brittle on level 5 to have the cooldown reduction of my shatter. Then again I want to use Spring Bloom on level 5 because I want to use my illusions as well to keep my allies healed, because it's just a nice way of passive heal, so whenever my enemies destroy my illusions I get a cooldown reduction on my next illusion, so I make sure I consistently have illusions up. Then I use Carry On level 2, it increases the duration of my illusion again to have a longer duration of passive heals. Encouragement on level 2 to get the cooldown reduction after getting limbs, because it's very easy to get limbs on supports, you just need to heal your allies. And because your illusions are such a nice way of passive heals, you don't have to do anything but placing them, you easily get a limb when your illusion randomly heal your allies. And the last card is just Efficiency on level 1 to reduce the cooldown on my dimensional link to have it a little bit easier to TP out when I'm getting dove. For the supportive playstyle of Resonance I use the same loadout as for Focusing Lens supportive playstyle, since the idea behind it is the same, you still want to use your illusions mainly for your team, so that's why both loadouts are built around or about your illusion cooldown and stuff like that. Let's talk about the Resonance Selfish playstyle. So when playing the Selfish playstyle, as I said, you want to focus on destroying your illusions or shattering your illusions. That's why you want to use Brittle on level 5 to also have the cooldown reduced as much as possible. Because you mainly want to focus on dealing damage and not wasting your time waiting until your illusions heal you up, I decided to use Harmony on level 5, so I'll get healed when my illusions actually deal damage and I can fulfill my main purpose to just deal damage with my illusions. Pursuit on level 3 helps me to increase the movement speed of my illusions, because I actually want my illusions to chase and reach the enemies. So even if enemies run away or are a little bit further away, I hope to actually hit them with Pursuit on level 3, so increased movement speed. As for most other loadouts as well, I obviously also have some filler cards, so that's why I have Tankable on level 1, just to increase my HP slightly, since I think it's a nice filler card. And lastly, I use Rewind again to have a little bit of illusion spawning while TPing around, to still have some nice resources of healing for my team when I try to TP around. Okay, so those are my loadouts I use for Ying. I want to clarify that I don't think those are the loadouts to go, or that you have to choose those loadouts, have to choose those cards. I just think those are probably mostly the viable cards on Ying. You obviously can choose completely different cards, you can rank your cards different, because in the end you have to find your own personal loadout fitting to your personal playstyle. So the loadouts I presented are fitting to my playstyle, they are fitting to my idea of the game, and I just wanted to share them to give maybe new players a understanding what cards might be good, what cards can I use to actually get easier into the game, and to also explain it. As I said earlier on, I now want to take a more detailed look at least into some cards and explain why I use those cards and what is the idea behind it. So what do I want to get out of this card, and not only what the card effect is in some way, I also want to explain why it is important to get such effect. Alright, let's talk about Spring Bloom. Why do you think this card is good, and what is the explanation besides, well, you get cooldown reduction when your illusion is killed? I mean, that's obvious, but why it is important to get cooldown reduction? So most people focus down Ying's illusions because they are easy to hit, they are stationary, and they won't move if you don't shatter them, or at least when you're playing Life Exchange, they won't move at all. So people just tend to shoot the easiest target, and the easiest targets are just turrets or illusions, deployables, whatever. So that's why people focus down Ying's illusions or deployables in general. Plus, Ying's illusions also have the effect to heal your enemies when you're playing against Ying, so that's why you also tend to destroy them, because you don't want your enemies to get healed. I think that's clear. So when people destroy your illusions, you lose your resource of healing, but your main idea is, or your main purpose is, to keep your team healed. So that's why I think it is important to reduce your cooldown on your illusion when an enemy focuses down your illusions, because it is very likely that enemies kill your illusions, plus you want to decrease the time without heals for your team. But besides that more or less simple explanation, there's another explanation why I like to reduce the cooldown, and this is because I like, as I said, to use my own illusions to body block myself. So when enemies trying to get to me and they need to destroy my illusion because it's a body block, and they kill it, I get the cooldown reduction to spawn another illusion. So in theory, it is always possible for me to hide behind my illusions. I mean, obviously this doesn't work every time, and people destroy my illusions quicker than my cooldown is off, but it's still a nice way. I mean, I already gave an explanation why it's important to increase the duration of your illusion, so why you want to use Carry On, but why is it that important? So your illusions are a very efficient and easy way to keep your team healed. I mean, it's the literal explanation of passive heals, or of heals over time. But you shouldn't underestimate it. So some people think, well, Ying's illusions, they are nice, but they are not that good. Well, actually they are. You just need to press Q and your illusions do the work for you. Your illusions focused on the ally being the lowest on HP, they're doing the same thing Ray heals do, so as you can see, it is very easy. Your illusions focus down the allies needing heals most, and the heal offered by your illusions is not that low, so that's why you want to increase that easy way of healing to make it as easy for you to keep your team healed. You don't have to pay any attention, you just press Q and your illusions do all the work over time for you to keep your team healed. I think it's important to also have nice filler cards on your loadout, so that's why Mesmerism and Rewind are in most of my loadouts, because it helps you to basically reload less, and it also helps you to still place illusions while getting dove and while you use your movement ability, so while you try to get out. You're worrying about getting pushed, you're worrying about the Andrew shooting at you, you panic and press F or Shift or whatever your keybind for this movement ability is, and your TP does the work for you as well. It spawns in an illusion, and your illusion, as I said earlier on, does all the work for you. It heals your team. Okay, now to Squadron. Why do you think it's such a good card, or why is it so good to increase the HP of your illusions, at least in some loadouts? So you want to make sure that your illusions won't get killed while chasing down enemies, and that's why you want to push them over the edge of 1200 HP, so no enemy is able to actually one-shot them with a body shot and without bulldozer, but that's a very good way to make sure your illusion reaches the enemy and still deals damage even if they shot at your illusion once. When playing the selfish support style on off support, I prefer to use Tankable on level 5, as I said, but why is it such a good card on level 5? I think it's always great to be as tanky as possible, plus it helps you to tank a Gen Assault, so when you're full HP and Gen Assault, you're actually able to survive the Gen Assault. Alright, that's it for the loadout cards and why I use certain loadout cards. Let's talk about the maps. What are great maps for Ying and what are more or less bad maps for Ying? Let's start with great maps for Life Exchange, since Life Exchange is the main support legendary or the legendary which makes Ying a main support. I personally would say that Ying has not really bad maps and you're actually able to make her work on all maps in some way, so you're not going to lose because you pick Life Exchange Ying on that particular map, but I still think there are some better maps and not that good maps for Life Exchange Ying. As we know, Ying has two resources of healing. She has her clones, her illusions, and she has her right click, so that's why she works on most maps, because most maps have flank routes, and flank routes are usually played by your off tank and your flank obviously, so that's why she doesn't really lack any kind of heal on most maps, I would say, because you are able to place down your illusions on flank routes on almost every map. That's why I think there are not really bad maps for Life Exchange Ying or Ying in general. So let's finally go quickly over some great maps for Life Exchange. I personally think Jaguar Falls is pretty good map for Ying because it is a close-up map. You are able to place down your illusions to also heal in the little rooms, and you are able to heal the flank routes greatly because the map is such a small map in some way, but you're still able to reach your allies with your illusions, with your clones, and you're also able to easily TP to them to actually give them the Life Exchange heal whenever they are not in line of sight to you. Ascension Peak works really well because you can just hide your illusions behind the pillars, so the enemy team doesn't have it that easy to actually kill your illusions, and you're also able to hide yourself and just peek whenever your right click is off cooldown. So you make sure the enemy team has it harder to actually kill you, to deal damage to you, and you make sure that your team is healed because you can place your illusions in safe spots. Your illusions keep your team healed passively, and you only peek whenever your right click is off cooldown to just give the burst heal, which is pretty good, so pretty safe, support safe for Ying. I personally love Splitstone for Ying, or love playing Ying on Splitstone, because usually supports struggle on this map, especially when your team is playing spinner side, so they're just hiding and you can't really reach them, because usually as a support you want to stay on high ground, and it is possible for you to still keep your team healed whenever they are playing spinner side because of your illusions. You can just drop down your illusions, the illusions will heal your team, and it is also nice that whenever you get dove on high ground you can just drop to your team can help you kill the flank pushing you, and after the fight you can TP back on high ground to make sure you're again in a safe spot, you're again behind your team to keep them healed. So this map works really well with Ying. It works really well with her abilities, with her TP and the illusions, making it possible to keep your team healed, and also having your ultimate to make sure your team is healed in spinner side or whenever they are out of line of sight to you. Serpent Beach is really good for Ying, since whoever reigns high ground wins mostly the fight, so Ying has the opportunity to either TP on high ground or put her illusions on high ground to keep her tank, depending on which tank obviously, so some tanks are not able to reach high ground, but for the ones being able to reach high ground and supporting the flank and tank at once, it's really good for Ying, or really good for the whole team. So Serpent Beach works really good, especially on point fights. You're also able to hide your illusions behind cover and your illusions are still able to keep your point healed. Okay, let's talk about some challenging maps where it depends on how advanced or how good you are with Ying, I'd say. So those maps can be really good if you know how to play Ying, how to play around with your abilities or how to use your abilities in natural cover, but those aren't bad in particular. Those are just harder to be good at, I'd say. Rockale is a little bit more challenging, I'd say, so for beginner players, probably not the best map, but for advanced Ying players it's actually pretty good, since there's a lot of cover you can use to hide your illusions behind. You can hide yourself, so you can hide and peek whenever your right click is off cooldown. And really important for the point fight, I'd say, you're also able to keep your flank routes healed and your point, since there's not really 3 different lines, there are only 2 different lines more or less, and you can use one illusion for yourself to place on left or right side depending which side you're playing, and recognize when the flank is coming, since most players tend to shoot your illusion first and then shoot you. Waterskate and Shattered Desert, both maps can be really good to use your ult for and actually TP to point, so you don't have to use your mount to get back to point. But besides that, longer maps are kind of rough because there's a range limit on your illusion, so they are not able to heal everybody on the map, and it's also harder to actually hit your RMB. But if you're an advanced player, if you're good with Ying, you actually manage to hit your right click over long distances as well. Okay, now to Ice Mines. Ice Mines is a really weird map, I'd say. So usually Ying is a really good pick on Ice Mines, but usually you see a lot of damage grok on Ice Mines. So as you remember, damage grok is the counter into Ying. So it can be rough to play Ying on Ice Mines, even though it's a pretty good map, especially because you can also use your ult to get back to point. Because on Ice Mines, it's really whoever wins the first fight about the point and has a good zoning wins the map or wins the point fight. So that's why it is important to have some abilities to make sure you actually can reach point without needing to go the whole way back to the point fight. So Ice Mines, as I said, can be good, but also probably rough because of you see a lot of damage grok. But the opportunity of just using ult is pretty good. You can hide your illusions really well if you know how to hide them. So play around damage grok, shock pulls. So for good players, for good Ying players, actually a pretty good map, I'd say. Let's talk about Timbermill. So first of all, Timbermill is a bad map in general, in my opinion. Timbermill sucks. It sucks to play support on Timbermill. It sucks to play tank on Timbermill, since everybody can just farm you. The only roles having fun on Timbermill are just damage and flank. That's it. Tanks and supports feel rough on Timbermill. So why is it bad for Ying? Snipers have it pretty easy to one-shot you. Ying's head hitbox is also pretty huge compared to her general model, and it is rough for you because you have to peek to actually heal your tanks. But it is not that easy as on other maps because there is not that great cover, and people have it pretty easy to farm damage over long distances on you because you're really squishy. Plus flanks have it also pretty easy to dive you and actually kill you. So that's why I think this map sucks in general, but I can see some potential for illusion placement. I also can see some potential for using your ult to touch point. But more or less, or overall, I would say Timbermill is a bad map, and try to maybe not pick Ying. Maybe try to pick Genos or Corvus and Timbermill. Same goes for Fish Market. Fish Market sucks for supports and tanks as well. It is kind of the same map, more or less, like you have high ground and the point is below or underneath the high ground, so people can just spam down on point. There's not much natural cover. There are some boxes you can hide, but same thing, you have to peek, you have to show yourself, you have to expose yourself to actually hit your right click. And it is not like Furia where you have auto aim your right click. You have to pay attention to where are the enemies, you have to pay attention to where is your tank. You have to make the right decision to when to peek, and then you also have to focus on hitting your right click. So there's a lot you have to pay attention to make sure you don't get headshot by that Nessa, you don't get killed by, I don't know, Vic, and it is also pretty easy for flanks to actually dive you. They can easily go around the map and you're just in the open. This map is hard to actually play on, but again, it is nice for your illusions. You can, as I said earlier on, place illusions almost on every map on flank route, so therefore it's good. Same again, long map, so a lot of value out of your ult TP, but it's not fun to play Ying on Fish Market. Bazaar is usually a nice or a good sniper map, and Ying struggles against snipers because, as I said earlier on, it is really easy to burst her. Plus, Ying heals greatly over time, but she can struggle against burst damage, even though she has a burst heal, but that only saves one person, and snipers deal twice as much damage usually as she heals, so that's why Bazaar is probably not the best map for Ying to play life exchange on. Okay, now I feel like Stonekeep and Frozen Guard, they don't really matter, so it's not good, it's not bad either, so it's just there. Those are just maps, I'd say. It can be annoying on Stonekeep to actually heal your allies because there's a lot of close-up rooms, but besides that, I don't mind playing on it. And just to conclude what I said about life exchange, Ying and her maps, as you can see, Ying is very nice on most maps. You can get a lot of value out of your ult TP, you can get a lot of value out of your illusion placements because they are great routes for you to put your illusions down. You can make sure your tank and your off tank and your flank are healed. And I'd say if you know how to play Ying, if you're advanced with her, you can play her on every map. Furthermore, I'd say Ying gets mostly countered by champions itself, not the map pick, so you won't lose a map because you picked Ying on a certain map. As I said, I also want to talk about resonance and focusing lens, but just for the fact that you usually would play life exchange most of the time, and I don't want to talk about every map 3 times in a row and point out the same things more or less. I will just give a general opinion of good and bad maps for resonating and focusing lens. So on what maps or what type of maps do you want to play Reso Ying? Reso Ying obviously likes close-up maps where it is easy for you to get value out of your chasing illusions or the explosion getting triggered when your illusions expire or killed. But that doesn't mean that you can't play Reso Ying on other maps. It's only harder for your illusions to actually get value out of it because people are more likely to run away from your illusions. Your illusions expire pretty quickly when the explosion gets triggered, so that's why you prefer close-up or closed maps where it is easy to get the value out of the damage or the value out of the legendary you picked. So those type of maps can be, for example, Jaguar Falls, Bright Marsh, Stonekeep and Ice Mains, but keep in mind that for those maps you usually struggle because enemies can hide and you need to leave your team to chase an enemy, but with Reso Ying you can actually spam your illusions and stay in a safer position and spam around corners, so that's why Reso Ying can work on those close-up maps. One point is you have it pretty easy to actually get value out of your illusions, plus there's a lot of space to hide behind or where the enemy team can fall back to, but your illusions can chase the enemies without yourself needing to expose. That's why I personally would say that sniper maps or open maps in general are harder for Reso Ying to make work or to actually justify to pick Reso Ying instead of focusing lens or life exchange. Those maps, for example, can be Frog Eye, Frozen Guard, Fish Market, Timbermill or Shadow Desert. Let's take a closer look at good maps or bad maps for focusing lens Ying. So it's kinda similar to resonance Ying since you have a lot of fall off damage. That's why you rather prefer smaller maps over longer maps because then you lose a lot of damage. But even though you lose a lot of damage potential over longer distances, you still are able to pressure snipers at least to that point that they are annoyed and worry about you, and you still deal a respectable amount of damage to actually make them use abilities and don't want to stay in the open. When you prefer to play the supportive playstyle, you kind of prefer the same maps as for life exchange, since you want to play behind the point, want to place down your illusions and focus on dealing damage on the point, but instead of using your right click to heal your allies and worry about your allies, you just place down your illusions and focus on main tank, or you also could just go flank routes and supporting them. And if you're wondering what those maps are, you actually could just go back and watch what I said about the illusion placement of life exchange. But nice maps where you can just sit behind point, put your illusions behind your team and spam damage on the point are Jaguar Falls, Serpent Beach, Ice Mines. It can be a little bit rough though sometimes, but with the right enemy team comp it actually works really well. And on other maps you just sit a little bit too far in the open, or the flank routes are too easy to engage on you. Okay, what bad maps are there for focusing lens then? As explained early on, you don't want to spam over too long distances, and so you lose a lot of value when considering the amount of damage fall off you gain then. You also want to avoid maps or picking Ying on those maps where you clearly lose the battle against other backline DPS, since you won't turn into a backline DPS when choosing damage Ying or focusing lens Ying. You're still a more close range to mid-range champion when playing focusing lens. Again, that doesn't mean that you never want to pick Ying on those maps, but just for the simple reason to help others getting easier into Ying and maybe learn how to play her, I only want to point out easy maps to begin with. Once you've mastered Ying, you know how to play her on those maps, and you also know what's bad about it or what you need to pay attention to. So rough maps to begin focusing lens with, or to practice focusing lens Ying on, are Frog Isle, Frozen Guard, Fish Market, Timber Mill, Splitzon Quarry, Ascension Peak and Bazaar. Even though there are some maps where the map is just bad map design, those maps are not just bad in general, it's more about better positioning, so that's why it is harder to actually practice Ying on, because you have to pay a lot of attention to your positioning instead of cooldown usage. It obviously is harder to have such massive fall off, but once you know where to position close to the enemy and still be in a safe position, or how to use your TP efficiently to kill the enemy backline and get out in crucial situations, you obviously can play focusing lens Ying on those maps as well. When playing ranked and drafting, it is definitely good to know which champions can you counter by your pick, but it is also good to know who can counter your pick, so that's why the next topic is going to be counter champions. So who can I counter with Ying and who counters Ying? Let's talk about counter champions first. Ying is not really a counter into anything, I'd say. The only advantage she brings is against teams dealing damage over time, since she out heals that kind of damage over time, because she is the literal explanation of healing over time, as I said earlier on. And especially in a 1v1 she has a burst heal, which is too rough to out damage for most champions dealing damage over time. I wouldn't say this is a counter, but Ying is definitely a good pick against flanks which lack on mobility and are not able to get onto high ground, since she can TP away on high ground and save herself easily. Some people might think, well, she's not that good at safe defending because she has not the same damage amount or output Furia has, she has not that kind of CC Dumbai has, but she's actually pretty good at safe defending against other champions pushing her, because she can heal herself with her illusions, she can body block herself and also gets cooldown reduction when her illusion gets killed, and using Spring Bloom as a card. So you can see, it's not only about getting out much damage or having a lot of CC, you can actually play around her abilities really well to also be able to defend yourself against other flanks and champions pushing you. And another reason why to pick her or who to counter is actually her ult, because her ult is really broken in early game, especially with the core changes, so you now have to wait until being able to actually kill something in Ying ult, because you can't get cauterize early on. But it's also important to know when you don't want to pick Ying, when you rather pick another support. So champions dealing a lot of burst damage are usually really rough for Ying to efficiently out heal, since she requires a lot of time to actually heal her team. She also struggles in safe defense against mobility flanks, being able to get over her illusions, follow her on high ground, or champions dealing AoE damage, since it is harder to body block those attacks. The counter into Ying is damage grog, since he has a pretty easy to actually farm off his shock pull, so bounce them off her illusions and farm damage, charge ult charge. So he also gains advantages as Spirit's Domain or Totemic Ward with his shock pulses. But the classic counter is damage grog. And when playing focusing lens, you definitely get countered by shields, since you won't get any extra damage on those and people can just hide behind them. Let's talk about items. What items would I recommend getting on Ying, or what items do I get on Ying? So the first item you always want to pick is Morale Boost. Since your ult is so broken, especially in early game, as I said, so you want to try to get as many ults as possible. The second item depends a little bit on the enemy team comp, so when the enemy team has a lot of CC, you definitely need to counter it since you usually die against a coordinated CC dive, so you definitely want to consider buying Wrestle as the second item. You also could think about getting Chronos if you want to get off more RMBs and reduce your Dimensional Link cooldown, but Chronos 2 should be the maximum you go because the rest is not really worth it spending credits on. When you feel like the enemy team has it pretty easy to kill you, or you feel like, well, I'm a little bit too squishy, you can consider getting Haven or Veteran, but I would say Veteran is currently the better pick because it is cheaper to get. Lastly, I would say you could get Nimble to make it a little bit easier to get around the map or reach your allies or run away from enemies when they push you. But besides that, I would say the other items are more or less situational, or you don't really need them, so the items I talked about are mostly the items you want to get on Ying. Also important to know is, does Ying synergize well with anyone? So do you want to get Ying when you already have that particular champion on your team? Well, the answer is no, since Ying is only a healer, but that's all. So to clarify it a little bit more, she heals great, she's insane, or her heal output is insanely high, but that's all. She can't offer any utility besides that. So she can't enable anyone with a CC ult, she can't give her allies movement speed, so that's the bad thing about Ying. She is a great healer, but that's all. You can't really enable anyone. But besides that, she's definitely a great pick for tanks who are able to increase their healing they receive, such as Inara using her right click, or Koa increasing the heal receives when he's below 50% when using Determination as a loader card. We're slowly getting to the end of the video, so what are some general tips for Ying and what can your team help you with? What do you want to ask your team to help you with? Ask your team to get Reju. Reju increases the effectiveness of Ying. So as I said, Ying, or the number one advantage you gain by Ying, is her heal output. She has an insanely high heal output, and to make it even more, ask your team to get Rejuvenate to make it easier to heal them up and be more annoying for the enemy team, make it harder for the enemy team to actually kill your teammates. As I said, damage grok is the counter to Ying, but there are also things countering grok. So whenever you picked Ying and the enemy team responded with a grok pick, just know that shields are actually a good counter into damage grok. So if you haven't picked your point tank, you can recommend getting a shield tank such as Nano or Barrack to actually counter the counter pick to a Ying pick. I think I said it earlier on already, but I still want to say it again since we're talking about tips and maybe someone skipped that part. So whenever you want to back up because your team died, place an illusion in front of you and TP to it. If the enemy team actually destroys the illusion, you can almost place another illusion and TP to it as well when using Spring Bloom on level 5. I also want to share a more advanced technique, and it is a very niche technique, but whenever a Khan ults someone out of your team and he wants to throw them off the map, you can try to place yourself in front of Khan and actually body block your own teammate. So whenever Khan is throwing your teammate into you, you will get knocked out of the map, but you can easily get back on with using your TP. Besides using your own illusions to body block yourself, you can also use the illusions to body block your own team in some way. So in close-up tunnels or doorways, you can use your illusions to body block enemies so they can't walk through your illusions and they are not able to touch the point. And you also can use your illusions to actually counter Jogos also. Whenever a Jogos is flying towards your point tank, you can try to place an illusion in front of your point tank so Jogos ults your illusion instead of your point tank. Alright, let's get to the last part. We are almost there, almost through the whole guide, but lastly I want to give some general Ying tips or some general support tips. So, what do you need to be a good support? Good supports definitely require a lot of game sense and mechanical skills. Even though tanks require a little bit more mechanical skills in my opinion, you still need those things. You need to know when to use your cooldowns, and especially on Ying, you need to know where to position yourself and her clones and on who you want to use your right click on. So what does it mean to have a good game sense or to have good mechanical skills? I mean, game sense is nothing you can really teach or learn. It's more or less something you gain over time and something you have. So know when to back up, know when to go in, know when to use certain abilities and ults. And this goes together with mechanical skills. You need to know when to use your CDs, when to use your heals on your allies. You need to know or need to learn to use your heals out of court. You need to know when do you want to wait for that out of court heal and when do you actually need to heal your allies during a fight or during a 1v1. The game sense itself is more about positioning, needing to know when do I want to push, when do I want to fall back, when or who needs to stay when on the point. One thing being really important for me to say is, for all support players, don't listen to DPS players. You don't want to overextend to heal them. They need to be in your line of sight or to be in range for you to heal them. If they push the enemy backline without you being able to heal them, it is mostly not your fault. I had Grandmaster DPS players in my team blaming me for not healing them when they clearly have no game sense and overextended or pushed in wrong situations. So keep in mind, even if DPS players mostly tend to be mean and blaming you for not healing, they should question themselves. They should look at their positioning, whether they overextended or not, and keep in mind they need to be in line of sight. If they are not in line of sight, it is not your fault. Another really important tip for all supports is look at your top left corner, look at the HP bar of your allies to see how your teammates are doing HP wise. Who do you need to prioritize for the next heal? Can you reach them? Are they in line of sight? Are they in range? To actually keep all your teammates healed at once and not only focus on your tanks, but this is more a advanced technique. In the beginning it is completely fine to be able to somehow sustain your team, somehow sustain your tanks. But keep in mind, for Rom it is actually bugged, the HP bar is bugged and you see him low when he lost his soul armor, but for the other ones, for every other champion it should work. It's a nice way to gain a quick overview on who to heal next. And lastly, I want to say, in the first place, you want to make sure that your tanks are healed, but that doesn't mean that you want to ignore your DPS players on purpose. It's just that it is more important to have someone on point and contesting or capturing than someone dealing damage. DPS players are supposed to heal out of combat in the first place and should be happy about every heal they receive. So that's why you always want to prioritize your ally being on the point, your ally being in the fight, to make sure you can actually contest the objective, you can actually push the card a little bit further. Alright, that's it for the Ying guide. We made it through the whole video. I worked so long, I spent so many hours on this guide. I don't know, I spent so many hours on the script, so many hours on recordings and all those things. I really enjoyed working on this video. I don't know, I just like putting out those guides. I like putting in that effort to you or for you to help you, and I don't know, it was a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed the guide. I hope it helps or whatever. Even if it doesn't, I hope it was enjoyable or something like that. Thanks for watching. Remember that there will be another video linked with positionings or illusion positionings for Ying, so if you want to see it, just look in the description. It's unlisted, so you wouldn't find it without the link. And I don't know, just thank you for watching. I hope you've had a nice day. Check out my Twitch to join video games, stuff like that. And always remember, don't forget, you guys are awesome.